Look around the room you're in right now. Maybe there's a heater running. Maybe your walls are filled with insulation you've never even thought about. If it gets cold, you can grab a blanket, turn up the thermostat, or make a hot drink. For you, warmth is automatic. But for most of human history, warmth was a full-time job. 30,000 years ago, your ancestors faced winters so brutal that a modern person dropped into them would likely be dead before sunrise. Temperatures could fall below -40 degrees. The wind could freeze exposed skin in minutes. There were no houses, no furnaces, and no hardware stores. And yet somehow they survived. Not only did they survive, but they developed survival methods so clever that modern scientists still study some of them today. And the craziest one involved building houses out of mammoth bones. Let's start with the first survival trick. Most people imagine Ice Age humans hiding inside caves. It sounds reasonable, until you realize caves were already occupied. By cave bears, by cave lions, by hyenas. Moving into a cave wasn't like finding an empty apartment. It was more like trying to evict a predator that could kill you. So many humans came up with a different solution. They went underground. Archaeologists have discovered ancient pit houses dug several feet below the surface. At first, these looked like simple holes in the ground, but they were actually brilliant. A few feet underground, temperatures remain much more stable than the freezing air above. Even during winter, the Earth traps heat. Without understanding modern science, Ice Age humans discovered that the ground could become a giant natural heater. Imagine digging a shelter using nothing but stone tools, wooden sticks, and animal antlers. Then imagine doing it while trying not to freeze to death. That wasn't primitive. That was engineering. But as impressive as underground shelters were, they weren't the craziest thing humans built. Not even close. Because eventually, some groups faced a problem. What happens when there are no trees, no forests, no building materials? Just endless frozen grasslands. The answer sounds completely made up. They built houses from mammoth bones. In places like modern-day Ukraine, archaeologists discovered circular structures made from the remains of dozens of woolly mammoths. Massive skulls formed the foundations. Giant tusks curved overhead to create the frame. Smaller bones filled the gaps. Then everything was covered with thick animal hides. Think about what that required. Not just strength, planning, cooperation, organization. Some of these shelters may have required the bones of nearly 100 mammoths. That's not survival, that's architecture. And here's the shocking part. When researchers recreated these shelters and tested them, they found that a small fire inside could keep temperatures dramatically warmer than the frozen world outside. In some cases, the difference was comparable to what modern insulated buildings achieve. Ice Age people weren't barely surviving. They were solving problems. And speaking of warmth, their next survival method was surprisingly familiar. Layers insulation. Today, winter jackets use multiple layers. Your home probably does too. Ancient humans figured out the same principle thousands of years earlier. They used animal hides with the fur facing inward to trap heat. Additional layers blocked wind. Outer layers protected against snow and moisture. Every layer had a purpose. The materials were different. The physics were exactly the same. But none of these shelters worked without fuel. And that's where things get strange. Because sometimes there wasn't enough wood to burn. Large parts of the Ice Age landscape were almost treeless. So humans adapted. They burned dried animal dung. They burned bones, especially mammoth bones. At first that sounds disgusting, but it worked. Researchers studying ancient fire pits discovered evidence that these materials were deliberately prepared to burn efficiently. People weren't simply throwing random objects into a fire. They were managing fuel supplies like experienced engineers. And there was another challenge most people never think about. Air. You might assume a completely sealed shelter would be best. It's not. Without ventilation, moisture from breathing, cooking, and fires builds up inside. Then it freezes. Over time, the shelter becomes dangerous. Some Ice Age shelters appear to have included carefully designed airflow systems. Fresh air entered through lower openings. Warm, moist air escaped through higher ones. The same basic principle used in modern ventilation systems. Think about that for a second. Humans using stone tools were solving the exact same problems modern architects deal with today. But surviving winter wasn't only about staying warm. It was also about staying fed. A hunting trip could fail. A storm could last days, sometimes weeks. So many groups created underground food storage systems. Natural freezers hidden beneath the earth. Frozen meat could remain preserved for long periods, giving families a food supply when hunting became impossible. Without these storage systems, one bad winter could wipe out an entire community. And then there were the groups that never stayed in one place. Some followed migrating animals across enormous distances. Building permanent shelters wasn't practical, so they carried their homes with them. Archaeological evidence shows that Ice Age people built portable hide-covered shelters supported by wooden poles. They could be assembled quickly, taken apart quickly, and moved wherever the hunt required. In a way, they were the ancestors of modern camping tents. Simple, portable, effective. By now, you might notice something surprising. The popular image of Ice Age humans is completely wrong. They weren't clueless cave people waiting for rescue. They were planners, builders, engineers. Every shelter required preparation. Every winter demanded strategy. Every mistake carried consequences. If a roof failed, people died. If fuel ran out, people died. If food storage failed, people died. There were no second chances, and yet they succeeded. Not for years, not for decades, for hundreds of thousands of years. Which brings us back to your room. Look around again. The walls, the roof, the warmth, all of it feels normal, almost invisible. But your ancestors would have considered it a miracle. Not because they couldn't create warmth. They absolutely could. They built houses from mammoth bones. They turned the earth into a heater. They invented insulation, ventilation, fuel management, and food preservation long before modern civilization existed. The difference is that every degree of warmth cost them effort, planning, labor, knowledge. You didn't invent comfort, you inherited it from some of the greatest problem solvers who ever lived. And the next time winter arrives and you reach for the thermostat without thinking, remember the people who survived an ice age with nothing but stone tools.